She threw me out the day after my son's funeral, claiming the house was hers now. At the will reading, she laughed and said, "Hope you enjoy being homeless, Rose." Then the lawyer opened a sealed envelope, and her smile disappeared. But before we continue, I need you to do something. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours, subscribe to this channel. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever experienced something like this. You're not alone. None of us are. Now let me tell you how this all began. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply letting someone reveal exactly who they really are. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in late October. Was dreaming about my late husband, Thomas. We were young again, dancing in our first apartment, when the shrill ring of my cell phone yanked me back to reality. I fumbled for it in the darkness, my heart already racing. Nothing good ever came from a call at this hour. "Mom?" Christopher's voice was strained, breathless, wrong. "Mom, something's... my chest. I can't..." The line went dead. I was out of bed before my brain fully processed what I'd heard. My hands shook so badly I could barely dial 911 as I threw on clothes and grabbed my car keys. "My son," I told the dispatcher, my voice surprisingly steady despite the terror clawing at my throat. "He's having a heart attack." "Christopher Mitchell, 2847 Oakwood Drive. Ma'am, we're dispatching an ambulance now. Are you with him?" "No, I'm on my way. Please send someone quickly." The drive to Mercy General Hospital was a blur of red lights and empty streets. I kept replaying that phone call in my head, the panic in Chris's voice, the way the line had just stopped. He was 43 years old, healthy. He went to the gym 3 times a week. This couldn't be happening. But it was. By the time I burst through the emergency room doors, my son was already gone. "I'm so sorry. Mrs. Mitchell." The doctor's voice seemed to come from very far away. "We did everything we could. The damage was too extensive. Massive myocardial infarction. A widowmaker, we call it. There was nothing anyone could have done." I stood in that sterile hallway with its fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell, and I couldn't process the words. Christopher was dead. My baby boy, who I'd held in my arms 43 years ago, who'd learned to ride a bike in our driveway, who'd walked across the stage to receive his college diploma, gone. Just gone. "Mrs. Mitchell?" A hand touched my elbow. "Would you like to sit down?" I looked up into the face of a nurse, her expression full of practiced sympathy. Behind her, I saw Natalie. My daughter-in-law stood near the windows, backlit by the harsh overhead lights. She was perfectly composed, no tears, no visible grief. Just a blank, almost calculating expression. Our eyes met, and for a moment I saw something flicker across her face. Not sadness, not shock, relief. No, surely I was imagining things. Grief was making me see things that weren't there. "Natalie," I whispered, moving toward her. "Oh, Natalie." She turned away from the window but didn't move to embrace me. Just stood there, arms crossed, watching me with those cool green eyes. "What happens now?" The words came out broken, barely audible. Natalie's shoulders straightened. When she spoke, her voice was crisp, businesslike. "Now we deal with reality, Rose. Chris is gone, and I have decisions to make." The coldness in her tone sent a chill through me. We'd never been particularly close, Natalie and I, but Christopher had always been the bridge between us. He'd smoothed over the awkward silences, filled in the gaps in our conversations, made family dinners bearable with his easy humor. Now that bridge was gone, and I was starting to see just how deep the chasm between us really was. "Of course, dear," I said, reaching for her hand. "We'll get through this together. We're family." She pulled away before I could touch her. "We'll see about that." I should have heard the warning in those words, should have recognized them for the threat they were. But I was drowning in grief, and I told myself she was just in shock. People processed loss differently. Some became emotional, others shut down. Natalie was clearly shutting down. "Let me help with the arrangements," I offered. "I want to be useful. Please, let me do something. I'll handle it." Her voice was flat. "I'm his wife." I know what he would have wanted, and that was that. For the next 3 days, I was effectively frozen out of my own son's funeral planning. I'd been living with Christopher and Natalie for 2 years. Not by choice, originally, but out of necessity and love. Thomas, my husband of 42 years, had died of pancreatic cancer 3 years ago. The medical bills had been staggering, even with insurance. I'd sold our house. the house where we'd raised Christopher, where every room held memories, to pay off the debt and have something left over. When Christopher found out I was looking at small apartments in cheaper neighborhoods, he'd insisted I move in with them. "Mom, don't be ridiculous," he'd said over dinner at their beautiful craftsman-style home in the nicest part of town. "We have plenty of space. The guest room is just sitting empty. Come stay with us." "Chris, I couldn't impose like that." "It's not imposing. You're my mother. And besides," he'd glanced at Natalie with a warm smile, "we'd love to have you." "Wouldn't we, Nat?" Natalie had smiled back, though it hadn't quite reached her eyes. "Of course, family should stick together." So I'd moved in, bringing my few remaining possessions and the $40,000 left over from the house sale. Christopher had been talking about buying a bigger place, and I'd offered the money as a down payment. "Consider it a loan," I'd said. "You can pay me back when you're able." "Mom, that's incredibly generous." Christopher had hugged me tight. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. What else am I going to do with it? I want you and Natalie to have a beautiful home." Natalie had been effusive in her thanks that day, throwing her arms around me, calling me the best mother-in-law anyone could ask for. I should have gotten that in writing. The 2 years I lived with them had been comfortable mostly. I kept to myself, helped with cooking and cleaning, tried not to be a burden. Christopher worked long hours as a marketing executive, and Natalie had her job as a fashion buyer, which meant lots of travel and late nights. I'd convinced myself I was being useful, that my presence made their lives easier, not harder. Looking back now, I can see how naive that was. The funeral was on a gray Saturday afternoon. The church was packed. Christopher had been well-liked, with friends from college, colleagues from work, neighbors, and distant relatives, all coming to pay their respects. Natalie had spared no expense. The flower arrangements were elaborate, white roses and lilies, Christopher's favorites. The program was printed on heavy cardstock with a beautiful photo of him on the cover, smiling that crooked smile I'd loved since he was a little boy. The eulogy was delivered by Christopher's best friend from college, Marcus, who spoke about my son's loyalty, his sense of humor, his kindness. I sat in the front pew and cried into tissues that my sister Judith kept handing me from her seemingly endless supply. Natalie sat beside me, dry-eyed and composed. She was dressed in an elegant black dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension, her hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. When people approached to offer condolences, she accepted them with grace and dignity. She was playing the role of grieving widow perfectly. It was during the reception afterward, held in the church fellowship hall, that I first realized something was very wrong. I was standing near the coffee station, accepting hugs from people whose names I couldn't quite remember, when I heard Natalie's voice from behind a large flower arrangement. "The life insurance alone will cover the mortgage for 2 years, she was saying in a low voice. "Maybe longer if I'm careful. And without the extra expenses." "Extra expenses?" That was Dylan, Natalie's brother. I recognized his voice, smooth, always slightly condescending. "What extra expenses?" "You know, Rose. The groceries, the utilities, everything adds up." My hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. "What about Rose?" Dylan asked. "Where will she go?" Natalie's laugh was sharp, brittle. "That's not my problem anymore, Dylan. She's a grown woman. She can figure it out like the rest of us." The coffee pot slipped from my numb fingers. Somehow I managed to catch it before it shattered on the floor. But the clatter made several people turn and look. I set it down carefully and walked away on shaking legs. My mind reeling. She was going to throw me out. She'd already decided, probably before Christopher was even in the ground. "Aunt Rose?" My nephew appeared at my elbow, Christopher's cousin Jake. "Are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," I lied. It's been a long day." "Of course. Listen, if you need anything—" "Rose." Natalie materialized beside us, her public face firmly in place. Sympathetic, caring. "Could you help me in the kitchen? There are some things we need to discuss." Jake looked between us, sensing the tension, but I nodded. "Of course, dear." I followed her through the crowd of mourners, nodding at people who tried to stop me for one more hug, one more whispered condolence. In the kitchen, Natalie closed the door and turned to face me. The mask slipped off completely. "I'm going to be direct, Rose." Her voice was cold, businesslike. "The house is in Christopher's name, which means it's mine now. I need space and time to process my grief without Complications. Complications? I kept my voice steady, though my heart was hammering. Natalie, what are you saying? I'm saying your living situation is going to change. You can't stay in the house anymore. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd overheard the conversation, but hearing it said directly to my face was different. Crueler. Natalie, I understand you're grieving, but surely we can… No. She held up a hand. I've made my decision. I'll give you until tomorrow evening to pack your things. That should be plenty of time. I stared at her, searching her face for any hint of the woman who'd called me the best mother-in-law just 2 years ago. She was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Where exactly do you expect me to go? She shrugged, an elegant lift of her shoulders. You're 65 years old, Rose. You're perfectly capable of figuring something out. Get an apartment, find a senior living facility. I don't know, and frankly, it's not my concern. Christopher would be horrified by this conversation. Christopher is dead. The words came out flat, final. And the sooner you accept that, the better off we'll both be. The house is mine. The decision is made. Be out by 6 p.m. tomorrow. She opened the kitchen door and walked out, leaving me standing there in a church kitchen, surrounded by casserole dishes brought by well-meaning neighbors, feeling like the ground had just opened up beneath my feet. I packed my life into 4 suitcases and 3 boxes. 65 years of living. And this was what I had left. Clothes, a few books, photographs, the quilt my mother had made me when I got married, Thomas's watch, Christopher's baby shoes, still tucked away in tissue paper, the rest, the furniture, the kitchen items I'd brought, the small decorative touches that had made the guest room feel like mine. I left behind. Natalie could do with them whatever she wanted. As I folded my clothes and wrapped my few precious breakables, I kept expecting her to come upstairs, to knock on the door and say she'd spoken in grief, that of course I could stay until I found somewhere else to go, that she hadn't meant it. She never came. At exactly 6 p.m. on Sunday evening, she appeared in the doorway of what had been my room. She was dressed casually, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, and her arms were crossed over her chest. Time's up, Rose. I zipped the last suitcase closed and looked around. The room was bare again, stripped of any sign I'd ever lived there. It looked like a hotel room, impersonal and cold. I'll need a few more minutes to get everything to my car, I said quietly. I'll help you. It wasn't an offer. It was a statement of intent. She wanted to make sure I actually left, and she wanted it to happen quickly. We made 4 trips in complete silence. Down the stairs I'd climbed countless times. Through the living room, where I'd helped Christopher pick out curtains. Past the kitchen where I'd cooked Sunday. Dinners for 2 years. Out the front door, and down the brick walkway to where my aging Honda sat in the driveway as I loaded the last box into the trunk, barely. Managing to close it, I turned to say goodbye, maybe to make one final appeal to whatever remained of her humanity. Natalie, I know you're angry with me for some reason. I wish I knew what I'd done wrong so I could… You didn't do anything wrong, Rose. Her voice was eerily calm. You just existed in my space, in my life, in my way. Christopher felt sorry for you, but I don't. I never did. The brutal honesty was almost cleaner than a lie would have been. I see. I got into my car and started the engine. Rolled down the window one last time. Will there at least be a formal reading of Christopher's will? I assume he left… something? Natalie actually laughed. Why would he leave you anything? You're not his wife, Rose, and it's not like you ever contributed anything financially to our household. The irony was so sharp it actually hurt. The $40,000 I'd given them for the down payment apparently didn't count. Either she'd forgotten or she'd convinced herself it had been a gift. Of course, I said softly. Silly of me to assume. I drove away without looking back. In my rearview mirror, I watched Natalie stand in the driveway until my car turned the corner and she disappeared from view. She didn't wave, didn't move, just watched me go like someone making sure an unwanted pest had finally left. I drove to the Hampton Inn on Route 9, the closest hotel I could afford, and checked in for a week. Room 247, second floor, view of the parking lot. I carried my suitcases up one at a time, too proud to ask for help from the young man at the front desk, who kept glancing at me with concern. Inside, the room was exactly what I expected. Generic hotel art on the walls, polyester bedspread in neutral tones, bathroom with tiny bottles of shampoo and soap, the smell of industrial cleaning products, and a million other temporary lives. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my reflection in the mirror above the cheap dresser. Who was this woman looking back at me? A widow. Childless now. Homeless. Apparently worthless in the eyes of the only family she had left. But as I sat there in that sterile room, something unexpected began to stir in my chest. Not despair, though that was certainly there too. Something sharper. Something that felt almost like anticipation. Natalie thought she'd won. She thought she'd successfully discarded the inconvenient mother-in-law and claimed her prize. The house, the life insurance, all of it. What she didn't know was that Christopher had been a much better son than she'd ever given him credit for. And that sometimes, the people you underestimate are the ones who surprise you most. I pulled out my laptop and started searching for apartments I could afford on my pension and Social Security. The numbers were depressing. Even modest one-bedrooms in safe neighborhoods were beyond my budget once I factored in utilities and food. I had enough savings to cover maybe 2 more weeks at the hotel, plus first month's rent and security deposit somewhere. After that, I'd be living paycheck to paycheck with no cushion for emergencies. At 65, I was essentially starting over, again. I thought about Christopher. About the last time I'd seen him 3 days before he died. We'd had dinner together, just the 2 of us, because Natalie had been traveling for work. He'd seemed distracted that night. Quiet. I'd asked if everything was okay. Yeah, Mom. Just thinking about things. About the future. Anything you want to talk about? He'd smiled, but it hadn't reached his eyes. Not yet, but soon. I promise. What had he wanted to tell me? What had been on his mind? I'd never know now. I lay back on the hotel bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. The acoustic tiles had little brown water stains in one corner. Someone else's problem. Someone else's negligence, frozen in place forever. Tomorrow I'd start apartment hunting in earnest. Tomorrow I'd figure out my budget and my options and how to make my remaining savings stretch as far as possible. But tonight, I let myself grieve. Not just for Christopher, but for everything I'd lost. My husband, my home, my son, my sense of security, my belief that family meant something. The tears came finally, hot and bitter, soaking into the cheap hotel pillow, and somewhere across town, Natalie was probably sleeping soundly in her beautiful house, convinced she'd gotten away with everything. She had no idea what was coming. 2 weeks into my stay at the Hampton Inn, I'd fallen into a depressing routine. Wake at 6:30 a.m. to the sound of the highway traffic outside my window. Make instant coffee with the room's tiny coffee maker. Eat a banana and granola bar I'd bought in bulk from the grocery store down the street. Spend the morning on my laptop, scrolling through apartment listings that all seemed either too expensive or in neighborhoods where I'd be afraid to walk after dark. The afternoons I spent in the hotel lobby, because it felt less claustrophobic than my room. Pretending to read library books while actually watching other guests come and go with their rolling suitcases and purposeful expressions. People who had places to be, lives to return to. I'd visited 3 apartments. All had been depressing in different ways. One had black mold creeping up the bathroom walls. Another was on the 4th floor of a building with a broken elevator. The third had been acceptable, small but clean, until the landlord casually mentioned that the building had a minor bedbug situation they were working on. I was running out of time and options. My savings were dwindling faster than I'd anticipated. The hotel, even at weekly rates, was expensive. So were meals, even when I stuck to fast food dollar menus and grocery store sandwiches. My teaching pension was $1,847 a month. Social Security added another $1,200, just over $3,000 to cover rent, utilities, food, medication, car insurance, gas, and every other expense life threw at me. The math was brutal and frightening. On Tuesday afternoon of my 3rd week at the hotel, as I sat in the lobby pretending to read a mystery novel I had no interest in, my phone rang. Unknown number. Local area code. Probably a spam call, but I answered anyway. At this point, any human contact was better than the silence. Mrs. Mitchell? A man's voice, professional and kind. This is Harrison Blake from Blake & Associates. I handled your son Christopher's legal affairs. My hand tightened on the phone. Yes, Mr. Blake, I remember meeting you once at Christopher and Natalie's house closing. I'm calling to inform you that the probate process is now complete, and there will be a formal reading of Christopher's will this Thursday at 2 p.m. in my office. Your presence is required. Required. The word hung in the air. I'm sorry, but I think there might be some confusion. I kept my voice steady. My daughter-in-law seemed quite certain that Christopher didn't leave me anything. Mrs. Mitchell. His voice was gentle but firm. I can only tell you what the will specifies, and it specifically names you as a beneficiary. I'll expect to see you Thursday at 2 p.m. My office is at 847 Maple Street, Suite 200. After he hung up, I sat in the hotel lobby for a long time, staring at my phone. Christopher had left me something after all, probably something small, sentimental. Maybe his father's watch or the photo albums from his childhood. Natalie wouldn't be happy about it, but she'd have to accept whatever Christopher had decided. Still, the fact that he'd thought of me at all sent a wave of warmth through my chest. My son had remembered me. Even knowing his wife's feelings, he'd made sure I'd receive something. It was more than Natalie had wanted me to have, and that felt like a small private victory. Thursday arrived gray and cold. With a bitter wind that promised winter wasn't far away, I dressed carefully in my best outfit. A navy blue dress I'd bought years ago for Christopher's college graduation, paired with a cream cardigan. It was outdated probably, but clean and dignified. I wanted to look like I still had some pride left, even if I felt like I'd been hollowed out. Blake & Associates was in a historic building downtown, the kind with crown molding and hardwood floors and brass nameplates. I rode the elevator to the second floor, my stomach churning with nervousness. What would Natalie say when she saw me there? Would she make a scene? The reception area was elegant. Leather furniture, soft lighting, original artwork on the walls. A young woman with kind eyes smiled at me from behind a mahogany desk. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Blake is expecting you. You can go right in. Second door on the left. I walked down a hallway lined with framed law degrees and certificates, my sensible shoes silent on the Persian runner. Voices drifted from the open door ahead, Natalie's voice sharp and irritated. I don't understand why this is taking so long. Christopher died 3 weeks ago. Surely the probate process should be complete by now. These things take time, Mrs. Mitchell. Harrison Blake's voice was patient. We have to ensure everything is done correctly. I paused in the doorway. The office was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk, windows overlooking the street. Natalie sat in one of 2 leather chairs facing the desk, dressed in black as if she were still in mourning. Next to her sat her brother Dylan, looking expensive and bored in a charcoal suit. Natalie's head snapped toward the door when I entered. Her expression darkened immediately. What is she doing here? The young receptionist appeared behind me. Mrs. Rosemary Mitchell is here for the will reading, Mr. Blake. Which Mrs. Mitchell? Natalie's voice rose slightly. There's only one Mrs. Mitchell now, and that's me. Actually, Mr. Blake said mildly, rising from behind his desk, in legal terms, you're both Mrs. Mitchell. Mrs. Rosemary Mitchell, please come in. Have a seat. He gestured to the empty chair beside Natalie. I sat, keeping my purse in my lap, my hands folded on top of it. Natalie shifted in her seat, angling her body away from me. Dylan leaned over to whisper something in her ear. She nodded curtly, her jaw tight. Now that we're all here, Mr. Blake settled back behind his desk, pulling out a legal file. I'll read Christopher's will in its entirety. After that, we can discuss any questions you might have. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and began to read. The first part was exactly what I expected. Natalie inherited the house, the cars, Christopher's retirement accounts, which had about $87,000 in them. His life insurance policy, $200,000 since he'd been relatively young and healthy. Various personal items and investments. Natalie nodded approvingly at each item, occasionally glancing at me with something that looked like satisfaction. See, her expression seemed to say, everything's mine. Dylan was taking notes on a legal pad, his pen moving quickly. Then Mr. Blake's voice changed, taking on a more formal tone. There is, however, one additional provision. Christopher added this to his will 3 months ago, in a separate codicil. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Natalie stopped nodding and leaned forward, her eyes sharp. 3 months ago? Dylan set down his pen. He modified his will 3 months before he died? Yes, he came to see me specifically for this purpose. The modification is entirely legal and properly witnessed. Mr. Blake cleared his throat and continued reading. To my mother, Rosemary Mitchell, who provided the down payment for our home and has never once asked for repayment, I leave the complete contents of safety deposit box number 8842 at First National Bank, along with all associated documentation and account information contained therein. Silence. Heavy, complete silence. Then Natalie's voice, sharp as a knife. What safety deposit box? Christopher never mentioned a safety deposit box to me. Apparently it was something he maintained privately. Mr. Blake looked up from the document. He was quite specific that the contents should go to his mother. This is ridiculous. Natalie's composure was cracking. If there's anything of value in that box, it should be part of the estate. This has to be contested. You're certainly free to try, Mr. Blake said calmly. But the provision is very clear, and Christopher was completely mentally competent when he added it. I witnessed the document myself, along with 2 other attorneys from this firm. When exactly did he add this? I asked quietly. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Mr. Blake consulted his notes. July 28th, a Thursday. He came in around 2 o'clock and spent approximately 45 minutes here. July 28th. I remembered that date because it was the day after Christopher and Natalie's 5th wedding anniversary. They'd had a big party, catered, expensive, with 50 guests. I'd helped set up and clean up, staying in the background as usual. Christopher had been quiet the next day. Withdrawn. I'd asked if everything was okay, and he'd said he just needed some time to think. This is insane. Natalie stood abruptly. Dylan, we're filing a challenge first thing tomorrow. This is clearly, before you leave, Mr. Blake interrupted, pulling out a sealed envelope. Christopher left specific instructions for his mother regarding the safety deposit box. He handed the envelope to me. These are the bank documents and his personal key. You'll need to take them to First National, along with the death certificate. They'll process the paperwork and allow you access. Usually takes about 3 business days. I took the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavier than I expected, the weight of the key inside. The weight of Christopher's final gift to me, whatever it might be. Natalie's eyes fixed on the envelope like a hawk watching prey. I'm coming with you to the bank, she announced. I'm afraid that's not possible. Mr. Blake's voice was firm. The safety deposit box access is restricted to Mrs. Rosemary Mitchell only. Bank policy, no exceptions. This is insane, Natalie sputtered. How do we even know there's anything valuable in there? It could be empty. It could be nothing but sentimental junk. I stood up, clutching the envelope to my chest. I suppose we'll find out next week. As I turned to leave, Dylan spoke up for the first time. Mrs. Mitchell, Rosemary, perhaps we could discuss this reasonably. Whatever's in that box, surely it makes sense to share it. Christopher would have wanted his wife to benefit from anything he left behind. I paused at the door and looked back at him. He was handsome in that polished corporate way, perfectly styled hair, expensive watch, practiced smile. But his eyes were calculating. Cold. Christopher was very specific about his wishes, I said quietly. The contents of that box are mine. That's what he wanted. We'll be filing a challenge, Natalie said, her voice hard. Count on it. You do what you need to do, I replied. I'll see you in court if necessary. I walked out with as much dignity as I could muster, my legs shaking, the envelope pressed against my chest like armor. In the parking lot, Natalie cornered me beside my car. Rose, let's be reasonable about this. Her voice had shifted, becoming softer, more conciliatory. Whatever's in that box, we should share it. We're family. Christopher would have wanted. Christopher was very clear about what he wanted, I interrupted. And it didn't include you having access to this. Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Don't forget, Rose, you're living in a hotel. You're essentially homeless. You need my goodwill more than I need yours. I met her eyes steadily. Actually, Natalie, I don't think I need anything from you at all. Not anymore. I got in my car and drove away, watching her in my rearview mirror. She stood in the parking lot, her phone already pressed to her ear, probably calling Dylan, already plotting their next move. But for the first time since Christopher died, I felt something other than grief and despair. I felt hope. Back at my hotel room, I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a key, small, brass, with a number engraved on it, 8842. Beneath it were official bank documents, forms I'd need to fill out, and a handwritten note from Christopher. Mom, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And Natalie has probably already shown you exactly who she really is. I'm sorry for that. But I'm not surprised. Go to the bank. Access the box. Everything inside is yours. And Mom, Don't tell Natalie anything about the contents until you're completely secure. Trust me on this, I love you. Always have. Always will. Chris, I held the note for a long time, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of grief this time, but something else. Gratitude, love, and underneath it all, a growing sense that my son had been protecting me in ways I hadn't known. 3 business days later, after providing the death certificate and completing what felt like endless paperwork, I finally stood in the vault room at First National Bank. Mrs. Parker, the bank manager, had been expecting me. She was a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Mitchell," she said as she escorted me through the security doors. "Your son was a valued customer here for many years. He set up that safety deposit box about 5 years ago and visited quite regularly. 5 years. Christopher had been planning this for 5 years. Box 8842 is one of our larger units," Mrs. Parker continued, leading me down a corridor lined with numbered boxes. "Your son upgraded from a smaller box about 2 years ago." She used her master key while I inserted Christopher's key. The box slid out smoothly. It was indeed large, about the size of a briefcase, and surprisingly heavy. "Take all the time you need," Mrs. Parker said, showing me to a private viewing room. "I'll be at my desk when you're finished. Just press the button if you need anything." Alone in the small, windowless room, I lifted the lid of the safety deposit box with trembling hands. The first thing I saw was a letter addressed to me in Christopher's familiar handwriting. Neat. Precise, the handwriting of someone who'd been taught cursive in elementary school and never forgotten it. "Mom, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Natalie has probably shown you exactly who she really is. I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from it while I was alive, but I can protect you now. You gave us $40,000 for our house down payment 5 years ago. You called it a loan, but you never asked for repayment. Never mentioned it. Never made me feel like I owed you anything, but I knew. And I couldn't just take that money from you and pretend it was a gift. So I've been investing it. Every month, I put the equivalent of what would have been a repayment into investment accounts. I've been careful, strategic, and Mom, it's grown. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. I forced myself to keep reading. The investment statements are in this box. So are the account access documents. Everything is in your name. Has been from the beginning. Natalie doesn't know about any of it. She thinks the mortgage payments have been stretched thin, that we've been struggling more than we have. The truth is, we've been fine. Your down payment gave us the cushion we needed, and I made sure to keep building on it, so you'd have something when you needed it most." I set the letter down and looked at the documents underneath. Bank statements, investment portfolios, account numbers, pages and pages of financial records. My eyes scanned the balances, trying to make sense of the numbers. $124,000. In a high-yield savings account, $89,000. In a diversified investment portfolio, $18,000. In a money market account, total, $231,000. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. This couldn't be right. This was more than 5 times what I'd originally given them. I picked up Christopher's letter again with shaking hands. "I know it seems like a lot, Mom, but this is what happens when you invest carefully over 5 years. I talked to financial advisors. I watched the markets. I was strategic. And here's something else you should know. Natalie has been telling people you contribute nothing to our household, that you're a burden. What she doesn't mention is that our mortgage has been easily affordable from the beginning, and any expenses related to you having stayed with us were covered by my salary without any problem whatsoever. I've been documenting everything, every conversation, every text message where she complained about you, every lie she told. It's all in the folder labeled documentation. I thought you should know what kind of person you've been living with." I reached for the folder he'd mentioned. Inside were printed emails, text message screenshots, credit card statements, years of evidence. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't confront her about this while I was alive. I kept thinking I could change her, that if I was patient enough, kind enough, she'd become the person I thought I'd married. But I was wrong, and I couldn't leave you vulnerable to her. So I prepared this, just in case. The final page of this letter has the names and contact information for 3 financial advisors I trust. They can help you manage this money. They know you might be contacting them. Take this money. Build yourself a life where no one can make you feel worthless ever again. Buy a home, travel, do whatever brings you joy. You've earned it. And Mom, don't tell Natalie about any of this until you're completely safe and secure. She'll try to take it from you. She'll claim it should be part of the estate. Don't give her the chance. I love you more than I ever said while I was alive. I'm sorry for that too. Your son, Christopher. I sat in that little room for nearly 2 hours, reading through everything Christopher had left for me. The investment statements, the documentation of Natalie's behavior, the careful notes he'd made about account numbers and access codes. By the time I emerged, my eyes were swollen from crying. But I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Power. Christopher had given me back my future. And more than that, he'd given me the truth about Natalie, documented, undeniable proof of who she really was. Mrs. Parker helped me arrange for the documents to be scanned and stored digitally, with the originals placed in my name in a new safety deposit box. She explained the process for accessing the various accounts and helped me set up online banking access. Your son was very thorough, she said as we worked. He came in about 6 months ago and updated everything, making sure all the documentation was clear and organized. He said, she paused, choosing her words carefully. He said he wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of, no matter what happened. Did he seem ill? I asked. Like he knew something was wrong? No, not ill. But he seemed purposeful. Like he was making sure everything was in order. She smiled gently. He was a good son, Mrs. Mitchell. He was, I whispered. He really was. As I walked to my car, my phone rang. Natalie's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Yes, Natalie? Rose. Her voice was falsely sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. I was thinking, maybe you'd like to come over for lunch today. We could talk. Discuss what you found in the safety deposit box. Clear the air between us. I smiled at my reflection in my car window. That's very generous of you, Natalie. What time? Noon? I'll make your favorite chicken salad. I'll be there. After I hung up, I sat in my car for a long moment, looking at the bank building behind me. Christopher had left me more than money. He'd left me dignity, independence, the ability to stand up to Natalie without fear. It was time for Natalie to learn that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who surprise you most. And I had quite a few surprises in store for her. I arrived at Natalie's house, my former home, at exactly noon, carrying nothing but my purse and a calm sense of purpose. The house looked the same as it had 3 weeks ago when I'd been unceremoniously evicted. The fall mums I'd planted in the front beds were still blooming. Cheerful bursts of orange and yellow that seemed obscene given everything that had happened. Natalie answered the door in a flowing cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her hair was down, styled in soft waves, and she'd done her makeup carefully. She was dressed for persuasion. Rose, I'm so glad you came. She stepped aside to let me in, her smile wide and false. I've made chicken salad just like you love it, and I baked fresh bread this morning. Funny how she remembered all my favorite things now that she wanted something from me. The dining room table was set, with her wedding china, the expensive Lenox pattern her mother had given her. Fresh flowers sat in the center, and the good crystal glasses were filled with iced tea. Natalie had clearly put considerable effort into this performance. Please, sit. She gestured to the chair that had been mine during the 2 years I'd lived here. I thought we could have a nice lunch and just talk, like family should. Family. The word tasted bitter. I sat, placing my purse on the floor beside me, and watched as Natalie served the chicken salad onto our plates with studied grace. She kept up a steady stream of chatter about the weather, about a sale at Nordstrom, about needing to have the gutters cleaned before winter. Small talk. Safe topics. The kind of conversation 2 acquaintances might have. Not a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law who just buried the man they both supposedly loved. Finally, after we'd both taken a few bites, Natalie set down her fork and leaned forward with an expression of earnest concern. Rose, I want to apologize for how things happened after Christopher died. I was in shock, grieving. I said things I didn't mean. Did you? I kept my voice mild, taking another bite of chicken salad. It was good. She'd always been a decent cook. Of course I did. You know, I didn't really want you to leave like that. It was just, everything was so overwhelming. The funeral arrangements, the finances, the pressure from everyone expecting me to hold it together. She reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I kept mine occupied with my fork. I needed space to process, but I should have been more compassionate about it. I see. I took a sip of my iced tea. So when you said Christopher felt sorry for me, that I'd never contributed anything to your household, that you didn't care where I went, that was all just grief talking? A flicker of something, annoyance, calculation, crossed her face before she smoothed it away. I was upset. I wasn't thinking clearly. Surely you can understand that. Oh, I understand perfectly, she smiled, clearly thinking she'd found an opening. I'm so relieved to hear you say that. I've been worried we'd let this misunderstanding come between us. Christopher wouldn't have wanted that. No, I agreed. He wouldn't have. So, she leaned back, trying to appear casual. About the safety deposit box. Were you able to access it? There it was. The real reason for this lunch invitation. I was, yes. Yesterday afternoon, her eyes lit up with poorly concealed eagerness. And what was inside? I set down my fork carefully. Documents, mostly. Financial records. Some personal items. Quite a lot of very interesting reading material. What kind of financial records? Dylan's voice came from the doorway. I turned to see him standing there in expensive casual wear, designer jeans and a polo shirt that probably cost $200. Dylan. I kept my voice even. I didn't realize you'd be joining us. Natalie thought it might be helpful to have someone with financial expertise here. You know, to help you understand whatever Christopher left for you. He walked over and sat down at the table, helping himself to chicken salad without asking. Natalie mentioned you might need guidance managing any assets. How thoughtful. I turned back to Natalie. You certainly think of everything, don't you? I just want to help, Rose. We're family. We should support each other. She exchanged a quick glance with Dylan. So, these financial records, are we talking about significant amounts of money? That depends on your definition of significant. Rose. Dylan's voice took on that patronizing tone I'd heard him use before. Let's be practical here. You're 65 years old, living in a hotel on a fixed income. If Christopher left you anything of value, you're going to need help managing it. I work in finance. I can recommend excellent advisors, help you invest it properly. Or, Natalie added quickly, we could pool our resources. Combine whatever was in the box with Christopher's life insurance and the other assets. We could invest it together. That way we're both secure. I looked at them sitting there. Natalie in her expensive dress, Dylan in his designer clothes. Both of them barely able to hide their eagerness to get their hands on whatever Christopher had left me. That's a very interesting proposal, I said. Tell me, Natalie, why would you want to share what's in that box? 3 weeks ago, you told me I'd contributed nothing to your household, that I was a burden Christopher felt sorry for. You threw me out the day after his funeral and told me to figure out my own life. Now suddenly you want to share resources and be family? She had the grace to look uncomfortable. I told you I was grieving. You were calculating. I pulled out my phone and opened the Photos app. Christopher was very thorough, you see. He saved quite a lot of documentation. Would you like to see some of it? The color drained from her face. Documentation of what? Of you. Of your text messages to your friends. Your emails to Dylan. Your conversations with your sister. I turned my phone toward her, showing a screenshot of a text conversation from 8 months ago. Natalie to her sister. God. I cannot wait until Rose finally moves out. Then we can turn her room into the home gym I've been wanting. The old bat takes up so much space and contributes literally nothing. Sister, does Chris know you feel this way? Natalie, Chris feels sorry for her, but he'll get over it once she's gone. Natalie lunged for my phone, but I pulled it back smoothly. There are dozens more, I said conversationally. Christopher was apparently quite good at documentation. This next one is from about a year ago. You discussing with Dylan how you could convince Christopher that I should be contributing more to household expenses, even though the mortgage was well within budget from his salary alone. Stop. Natalie's voice was barely a whisper. And then there's this email chain between you and your friend Monica, where you're laughing about how gullible I am, how easy it was to make me feel like a burden when you were already planning to evict me the moment Christopher died. I set my phone down on the table and looked at her with what I hoped was mild curiosity. That was forward thinking of you, by the way, planning my eviction while Christopher was still alive. Very efficient. Dylan cleared his throat. Mrs. Mitchell, Rose, I'm sure there's context to these messages that you're not. The context is very clear, Dylan. Your sister has been manipulating both Christopher and me for years. And he knew it. That's why he set up the safety deposit box. To protect me from her. Natalie was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. He had no right to save private messages. That's a violation of privacy. Actually, they were messages about his mother, sent from his house, regarding his household. He had every right. I stood up slowly. The question is, what are we going to do about this situation? What do you want? The mask was completely off now. Natalie's face was hard, calculating. Money? Is that what this is about? How much do you want to keep quiet about those messages? I almost laughed. Keep quiet? Natalie, I don't want your money. I never did. Then what's the point of this? Why show us those messages? Because, I said quietly, I wanted you to know that I know. That Christopher knew, that all your manipulation and lies were documented and seen and understood. I picked up my purse. You threw me out of my home the day after my son's funeral. You told me I was worthless, that Christopher felt sorry for me, that I'd contributed nothing. But here's what you didn't understand about Christopher. He saw everything. Every cruel comment, every lie, every manipulation. And he documented it all, not to hurt you, but to protect me. Natalie stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You can't prove anything. Those messages wouldn't hold up in court. Court? I raised an eyebrow. Oh, sweetie, I'm not taking you to court. She blinked, clearly confused. You're not? Why would I? You've already given me everything I need. I don't understand what you're talking about. I pulled a folder from my purse, copies of some of Christopher's documentation. I placed it on the table between us. Christopher didn't just save text messages, Natalie. He saved everything. Bank statements showing that the house payments have been automatically affordable from his salary the entire time I lived here. Email chains between you and Dylan discussing the Rose situation. Credit card statements showing luxury purchases made on the same days you told Christopher you were worried about money. Dylan leaned forward, trying to see the papers. Those are private financial records. They're Christopher's financial records, which he compiled and left to his mother. Completely legal. I opened the folder. My favorite, though, is this email thread between you and Dylan from about a year ago. The one where you discuss your long-term plans. Natalie's breathing was becoming shallow. What plans? The plans to have me declared incompetent so you could access my pension and Social Security. You didn't know I'd already established myself as completely competent with my own bank and doctors, so that plan would never have worked. But the fact that you discussed it, I shook my head. That's elder abuse conspiracy, Natalie. It's a felony in this state. We never actually did anything. Dylan started. No, you didn't. Because Christopher figured out what you were planning and took steps to protect me, including setting up that safety deposit box and making sure everything in it was legally mine. Natalie sank back into her chair. What was in the box, Rose? How much money? Why do you want to know? Because I'm his wife. I have a right. You had a right to what Christopher explicitly left you, which, as I recall, was quite generous. The house, the cars, the retirement accounts, the life insurance. I'd say you did very well. But what did he leave you? Her voice was rising, edging toward panic. What's in those accounts? I closed the folder. That's really none of your business, is it? I'm his wife. You were his wife. And apparently, he knew exactly what kind of wife you were. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Then Dylan spoke, his voice sharp. You're trying to steal what's rightfully Natalie's. That money, whatever's in those accounts, it should be part of the estate. Should it? Based on what legal principle? Based on the fact that she was his wife and you're just his mother. The casual cruelty in those words, just his mother, hit me like a physical blow. But instead of pain, I felt clarity. You know what, Dylan? You're absolutely right. I am just his mother. The woman who gave birth to him, raised him, paid for his college, and lent him $40,000 for a house down payment. Natalie's face went white. You said that was a gift. Did I? Or did you just assume it was? Because I never said the words, this is a gift. I said it was for your down payment. Christopher understood it was a loan. That's not, he didn't mention it because he was paying it back. Every month for 5 years. Plus interest. Plus careful investment of the principal. And you know what $40,000 grows into when it's invested carefully over 5 years? I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The balance filled the screen. I turned it toward them. $231,000. Natalie made a sound like she'd been punched. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself, her eyes fixed on the number. "That's impossible," she whispered. "That's compound interest and good financial planning. But that's almost as much as the life insurance policy." "Yes, it is. And it's mine. Every penny. Christopher made sure of it." Dylan found his voice. "That money should be split between both of you. It's only fair." "Fair?" I looked at him. "What's fair about your sister throwing me out of my home the day after my son's funeral? What's fair about her telling me I'd contributed nothing when I'd given them $40,000 and 2 years of cooking, cleaning, and trying to stay out of the way?" She was grieving. She was calculating. She saw an opportunity to take what she wanted without the inconvenience of having me around. And Christopher knew it. That's why he protected me. I stood and slung my purse over my shoulder. "The money is legally mine. Christopher made sure of that. If you want to challenge it, go ahead. But you'll lose. And in the process, all those documented conversations, all your planning and manipulation and lies will become part of the public record." "Wait." Natalie stood up, reaching toward me. "Rose, wait. Please, let's talk about this rationally." "There's nothing to discuss." "Yes, there is. The money, our relationship, everything." She was speaking quickly now, panic making her voice tight. "Look, I know I made mistakes. I was stressed about Christopher's death, worried about finances. But we can work this out." "We can work what out exactly?" "The money situation. Our relationship. I know I said some hurtful things, but I was grieving. We both were. And now we can move forward together. As family." I pulled out one more document from my folder, one I'd been saving. "Family," I repeated quietly. "That's interesting. Because Christopher also documented your spending habits, Natalie, including the $23,000 you charged to credit cards in the 3 months before he died." Her face went ashen. "Spa treatments, designer clothes, a weekend in Napa with your sister, all while telling Christopher you were worried about money for groceries and household expenses. I wasn't. That's not. You weren't what? Planning to live off his life insurance while getting rid of the inconvenient mother-in-law who might question your spending?" I shook my head. "Christopher saw everything, Natalie. Every purchase, every lie, every manipulation, and he made sure I'd be protected from you." Natalie collapsed back into her chair. The fight went out of her all at once, leaving her looking small and defeated. "I can't lose everything," she whispered. "I can't go back to having nothing." I looked at her, this woman in her expensive dress, in her beautiful house, surrounded by luxury, complaining about having nothing. "You're not losing everything, Natalie. You're keeping exactly what Christopher explicitly left you. A house worth $500,000, a $200,000 life insurance policy, his retirement accounts, his cars. You're financially set for years if you manage it responsibly. But it's not enough. Not for the lifestyle Then maybe you need a different lifestyle." I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Christopher loved you, you know. Despite everything, despite seeing who you really were, he kept hoping you'd change, that the woman he married would come back." Tears were streaming down Natalie's face now, ruining her carefully applied makeup. "But she never did," I continued quietly. "And so he made sure his mother would be okay. Because that's what good sons do." I left her there in her expensive dining room, surrounded by her wedding china and her carefully constructed life. In my car, I sat for a moment, letting the adrenaline drain away. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From relief, from the weight of finally speaking the truth. I drove away from that house, away from the life I'd lost, and towards something new. 6 months later, I stood in the living room of my new home. It wasn't large, a modest 2-bedroom cottage in a quiet neighborhood, with a small yard and a porch where I could sit in the morning with my coffee. But it was mine, paid for in cash. No mortgage, no landlord, just mine. The rooms were filled with furniture I'd chosen myself, paintings I'd picked out, books on shelves I'd assembled with help from my neighbor, a kind widower named Frank, who'd brought over his power drill and spent an afternoon making sure everything was sturdy and level. I'd used $180,000 of Christopher's gift for the house and immediate expenses. The remaining $51,000 was invested exactly as his financial advisor had recommended. Conservative, stable, generating enough income to supplement my pension comfortably. I would never be wealthy, but I would also never be homeless. Never be dependent on someone else's generosity. Never have to feel like a burden again. My sister Judith had visited the week before, flying in from Phoenix to see the new place. "It's perfect, Rose," she'd said, walking through the rooms with a smile. "Christopher would be so proud." I like to think so. We'd had dinner on the porch, watching the sunset, and she'd asked the question I knew was coming. "Have you heard from Natalie?" "No, I assume she's still in the house." Dylan mentioned in an email that they decided not to challenge the will after all. Their lawyer apparently advised them they had no case. Good. Judith had squeezed my hand. "You deserve this peace, Rose. After everything you've been through." Peace. Yes, that was what I felt. Not victory exactly, though there was satisfaction in knowing justice had been served. But mostly just peace. On the mantel above my gas fireplace, I'd decided I was too old to deal with real wood, sat a photograph of Christopher. Not from his childhood, but from about a year before he died. He was laughing at something off camera, his eyes crinkled at the corners, that crooked smile I'd loved so much. Next to it was the last letter he'd left in the safety deposit box. The one I hadn't mentioned to Natalie because it was personal. Private, just for me. "Mom, if you're reading this, you've already accessed the box and seen the accounts. I hope the money helps. I hope it gives you the freedom to build a life that makes you happy. I'm sorry I didn't confront Natalie about her behavior while I was alive. I kept thinking I could fix things. That love would be enough to change her. I was wrong, but I couldn't let you be vulnerable to her. I couldn't die knowing you might end up homeless or struggling because of her. So I did what I could. I invested your money. I documented everything. I made sure you'd be protected. I wish I could be there to see what you do with this gift. But I know you'll do something wonderful. You always did. Live well, Mom. Be happy. Travel if you want. Make friends. Find joy. That's what I want for you more than anything. Thank you for being the best mother anyone could ask for. Thank you for teaching me about integrity and kindness and doing the right thing even when it's hard. I love you. Now and always. Your son, Christopher." I read that letter at least once a week, usually in the morning with my coffee. It kept him close, reminded me that he'd seen me, valued me, loved me enough to protect me even after he was gone. Sometimes people asked me if I was angry at Natalie. If I wanted revenge, the answer was no. I didn't need revenge. Natalie would have to live with who she was, with what she'd done, with the knowledge that her husband had seen through her and protected his mother from her. That was punishment enough. As for me, I had what I needed. A home, financial security, the knowledge that my son had loved me enough to make sure I'd be okay. And every morning, when I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, with my own future secure, I felt Christopher's presence. Not literally, I wasn't a fanciful person, but I felt the love he'd left behind, the care he'd put into making sure I'd be protected, the thought and planning that had gone into his final gift. "Thank you, Christopher," I whispered to his photograph, "for everything, for seeing me, for protecting me, for being exactly the son I raised you to be." Outside, birds sang in the oak tree by my porch. The morning sun streamed through my windows. My neighbor Frank waved as he got his newspaper from the driveway. This was my life now. Simple, peaceful, mine. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. If this story moved you, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps me continue sharing stories that uncover the hidden truths of everyday life. There are so many more untold stories waiting to be revealed. Thank you for being here. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in their place? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share them with me in the comments below. On the screen, you can see 2 more life stories I strongly recommend. There are many more waiting on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.